G'day, and welcome to the Seacreatures Podcast, a show all about the amazing animals that live beneath the waves. Each episode is about a specific sea creature, with a guest who has spent time and interacted with this ocean animal. Our guests range from marine biologists to underwater photographers, citizen scientists, scuba divers, and anyone with an intense passion for marine life. My name is Matt Testoni, and I'm all of the above. And joining me for this episode of the Seacreatures Podcast is Klaus Stiefel, and he is a marine biologist and author. And we're going to be talking all about the world of the lionfish. Well, welcome to the show, Klaus.
Well, thank you very much for having me a second time.
Yeah, second guest.
Happy to be back. So maybe we should tell your audience where we met, which was during our instructor training, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, so when was that? Like, what, 10 years ago, I think?
I think it's pretty much 10 years ago. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's an awesome kind of reconnect moment, and you knew so much about marine life then. It's so awesome to have you on the show to chat 10 years later, where your knowledge is like even crazier.
Well, it's my pleasure.
So today we're going to be chatting all about lionfish, and so you kind of messaged me, and we were like, oh, let's do another episode, and you're like, I'm going to do lionfish. Let me talk about lionfish. Why did you choose lionfish, and why is that your kind of new fish to chat about?
So this is what's happening with the lionfish. So I live and scuba dive in the Philippines, and I've done a dive this morning, and I've seen a few lionfish, and there is the Pterois volitans, so the large species of lionfish. There are a couple of dwarf lionfish, and you would see several, or you would see one on a dive. So it's not a rare fish, but the lionfish has expanded its range. At home, it's native to the Indo-Pacific, meaning, anywhere from the east coast of Africa to the islands of Polynesia. And it's a successful species there. But sometime in the 1980s, a few of these, and these were probably not a lot of animals, a few of these were released in Florida or in the Carolinas, in that region. There were probably a few release events. And previously, there had not been any lionfish in the Caribbean. Now, about 40 years after these first releases, the whole Caribbean is full of them. So this is an invasive species, just like the cane toad in northern Australia.
Yeah. And it's such an interesting one because in Australia, you see a lionfish on the reef and it's something great to photograph and to talk about. And then you'll post a photo or you'll be chatting to someone and be like, I saw a lionfish. And people from, North and South America are like, oh my God, what? Why are you so happy about a lionfish and all that thing? And it's an interesting thing that to them, it is such a problem. But before we jump too much into it, tell us what exactly a lionfish is and what's remarkable about a lionfish.
Yeah, so lionfish it's in the family of the Scorpionidae, so it's a type of scorpionfish. Scorpionfish, what they all have in common is they're pretty venomous. So they're at the back, the dorsal fin, that's a really dangerous weapon. So essentially, it has these fin spines, and these fin spines are hollow, and there is a pretty powerful venom in there. So if you touch the lionfish, you're probably not going to die, but you're probably going to be in severe pain, and maybe you're going to go to the hospital. So this feature of all these scorpionfish and lionfish and the stonefish are, of course, a sister family to these. And you can probably guess which country has the most venomous fish in the world.
Is it Australia?
Yeah.
Of course.
Obviously, right? I don't know why that is, but that's kind of a rule in biology. The really dangerous stuff is in Australia. So the estuary stonefish is a terribly venomous fish. No, the lionfish is not as bad, but it can defend itself well against potential predators. So it's essentially, it has these the elongated fins. It's really more hovering through the water than swimming fast, because it knows nobody's going to mess with me because I'm so venomous. Now It's not just safe from other predators, it's also a pretty powerful predator. And so it's essentially feeding on small to medium sized fishes, like, gobies, topic of my previous book, small wrasses, blennies, things like that, cardinal fish. And when it came to the Caribbean, the fauna there essentially had no clue how to deal with this. So it's like somebody entering a theater of war, for the first time with an airplane, right? And none of the opponents had any clue how to deal with that. And so they essentially they thrived in an extremely powerful manner. So there would be essentially nobody who could hold them up. So all of the native fishes became easy prey.
Yeah, and so just before we jump into too much of how they're like destroying everything in the Caribbean, they're called lionfish because they've got those big kind of spines that are splayed out, and they look kind of like a lion, but then the kind of got stripes like a tiger. And I mean, how big are they? They're about 30, 40 centimeters?
Yeah, 30 centimeters. So, I think it's mainly the face which makes them a lionfish. And in German, the literal translation of the German name is red firefish. And that also makes sense, right? Because this Rotfeuerfisch, because these stripes are all, the dark, light red, dark red, and black. And so it looks a little bit like a fish which has this, flames painted on its body.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite a pretty fish, but I imagine everyone in the Caribbean thinks it is not. The other thing I was going to say is I love clarifying cool things that I've like noticed, but their lionfish are venomous, and that's very different to poisonous, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, venom will be injected by the animal into you either via teeth or spines, and the animal itself will remain alive. So, a lionfish is venomous, and a snake is venomous. But in contrast, for instance, the pufferfish is poisonous. So you would have to catch it and eat it, and then you would perish. And so there's a big difference, and it makes a difference for the individual animal as well, right? Because that if you're poisonous, you lose your own life in order to harm the enemy. So that's really more of a defense of a whole population, right? That the predators at one point learn, well, we're not going to eat the pufferfish anymore. But with the lionfish, an individual fish would be able to fend off a predator. Or, I've actually talked to one guy who has, touched one when cleaning an aquarium. And, seemed like a pretty tough guy. And he said he was in so much pain and his hand was swelling up for a couple of days.
Wow.
So that's the venom here.
Yeah, I mean, I've like come close a few times. Often go diving in board shorts. When I was in Indonesia last time, diving in board shorts at night, the lionfish will gather around you to like hunt off your light. And every time you do a kick stroke, you're like, am I gonna like knee one? I mean, I'm lucky.
Exactly.
But yeah, so explain to us a little bit about like their hunting as well, because they're ambush predators, aren't they?
Exactly. So what they do, they hover. So they would almost be, they would catch a lot of animals by surprise. And all of their fins are really so unusually shaped. And all of these stripes, they break up the shape. So this does not look like a regular fish very much. This looks, if you're a small fish, and you always have to realize, right? Humans just don't have, big eyes. But particularly what sets us apart is we have this large visual cortex. We have this, we have like 200 grams of brain or something like that, which is only tasked to analyze visual scenes. A fish doesn't have that. So a small fish might not be able to see a fish shape when the lionfish comes on. And then they would just essentially hover along, and they would just grab the small fish, and they probably never knew what hit them. And this is the case here, in the Indo-Pacific. And this is also the case, this is much more the case in the Caribbean. So, there were a few things which came together. In the Caribbean, the fauna, the small predatory fish just were not adapted to dealing with lionfish at all. And the other thing is, there are, of course, fish which feed on lionfish, like large groupers and sharks. And there were two things with these in the Caribbean. They probably at first they also didn't realize that this was good food. And then, have you dived the Caribbean at one point?
Only off Florida, so down in the Florida Keys is
Okay.
as far down as I've been. Yeah, because they're there as well, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So they're now from the Carolinas, and I think they've reached the Brazilian coast. Now, I've dived Cuba 15 years ago, which was fairly nice where we were. But a lot of places in the Caribbean the reefs are in very bad shape. And this is not the case because the people there are irresponsible, but the people there are terribly poor. And so, there is all kinds of, there's just overfishing and there are destructive fishing practices. There's a lot of runoff, there's destruction of coastal ecosystems. So a lot of this is really a big problem. And then the lionfish kind of jumped into this ecosystem, which was already on the ropes. And, if I may mention, there is a new book which I wrote together with my good friend and collaborator, Dr. James Reimer, who is a Canadian guy who is a professor in Japan. Really interesting guy. And he's more of a coral guy. And one chapter in the book is about the lionfish. And what we're doing in the book, we are taking an environmental problem like this invasion. And then we're not, what I really dislike is this preaching and this moralizing when it comes to environmental problems, because you're not gonna get your message across. So the message is, that there are serious problems in the ocean, and so how are we explaining them? We're explaining them as dive briefings. So probably a lot of your listeners will be divers, so they know, right? When you go diving, there will be a dive master who would normally say something like, "We're in Tasmania. We're going to look at the kelp, and the kelp is awesome. It's really interesting, and this is what we can see. And be careful about not getting entangled." So there is a presentation to a degree about this ecosystem, which people are exploring. We're doing the same thing, but we're not presenting nice ecosystems. We're presenting like, look, we're going to look at lionfish today, and we're going to go to a spot in the Caribbean where there's so many lionfish that it's a real problem, and that they're feeding on a lot of the native species, and they're really messing up the ecosystem. So each environmental problem in our book is a dive. And so these are 25 future dives then. So some of the dives are actually happening. They will happen in the future if things get worse. But in many cases, when it comes to environmental problems in the ocean, the future is now. So, when it comes to this invasive species, which is the lionfish in the Caribbean, the future is happening right now. So, the past was 1970 when the Caribbean, there were problems, but there were no lionfish spreading there. And then starting in the early 80s, these fish essentially started to take over a lot of the ecosystems in this part of the world.
Yeah, and I was doing a bit of reading about this. So, you might think, okay, a fish comes in and it eats a lot of other fish. That's kind of really horrible, but is that like really the end of the thing? And it's not really, because they're eating different fish that are kind of feeding on algae and keeping algae off the coral. And so it's actually leading to a direct decline of the coral, even though they don't eat coral. Isn't that right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's always this competition essentially between the algae and coral, and the Caribbean. And there's actually another chapter in the book, because of this heavy fishing in the Caribbean. A lot of the algae-eating fish were already in short supply, and as a consequence, the sea urchins really thrived. So you would have these massive densities of mainly the diadema, the black long-spined urchins. And then I believe this happened in the 1990s, there was this massive pandemic, essentially, of sea urchins. So you had areas where 99% of the sea urchins died within weeks from this bacterial infection. So if you take away a part of the ecosystem, and then, another part of the ecosystem really blows up, and as a consequence, you have fewer species. You essentially have a simpler ecosystem. That's a more vulnerable ecosystem. So there will be less biodiversity, and it's more prone to just a complete collapse.
Yeah. And so one thing I try and understand with the lionfish especially is, they've got no predators in the Caribbean really. And so they've gone out of control, but
Yeah.
they don't go out of control in the Pacific. What are some of the reasons for that? Is there a predator in the Pacific, or why are they not a problem here compared to the Caribbean?
Yeah, this is actually a very interesting question. So I think partially is because these a lot of the ecosystems in the Caribbean, the predators would exist, right? There are groupers, but the groupers are just so overfished. If you're a poor fisherman in Haiti or in the Dominican Republic and there is like a 60 centimeter grouper, you will take it, right? If you're on spear fishing. And so the same thing with sharks. The sharks are so decreased that the sharks can't take them out anymore. I do think there are probably other reasons here as well. So there is a phase where reef fish are just like a centimeter long. There will probably be some predation. And with predation, I want to include parasites. So maybe, I think it's this has not been shown to my knowledge, but I think there must be, biological controls essentially of the lionfish at smaller body sizes that, they would just be essentially eaten while they're just newly settled on the reef or while they're still larvae. So it's just the whole ecosystem is more adapted to them.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And just to bring it back a little bit before, why I really wanted to harp on about the venom and the poison is because
Yeah, yeah,
eating them is one of the main controls that's kind of going on at the moment, isn't it?
yeah. So they're hunting them, courtesy of their odd hunting technique. They You can relatively easily spear them, and in the Caribbean they would have these derbies, like who can get the most lionfish in 3 dives or something like that. And so, I have not tried, but I think they're relatively good eating. I've seen, recipe books is exclusively dedicated to lionfish. And, they're big enough and the biomass, per lionfish is big enough. And they're actually, they're accessible enough that hunting them will make a difference. You can get them in restaurants there. And, generally predatory fish are good eating, right? Because they eat on other protein sources. So they have more bitey meat. And the thing which is happening, though, it seems, is that they're moving away. So, as a recreational scuba diver, you can go to about 40 meters, right, without risking your safety. So then there's a paper, and there are recordings, like footage, where the lionfish are hunting a species of so far undescribed goby. So there is a fish which is really unknown to science, and the lionfish are feeding on it. And this was filmed with a remote operated vehicle in 110 meters. So
Whoa.
exactly, it seems that they're evading human pressure. And then, yes, so this lionfish hunting, I think it makes sense, but it's always somewhat restricted to, that how much coastline is there in all of the Caribbean, right? And how many places is there diving? So that's kind of their weakness of this. But I think in diving destinations where you have a couple of dive shops and they get together and they hunt them, I think this works.
Yeah, and I mean, if the solution to the problem is having more big fish, such as big gropers and
Yeah,
stuff, and sharks that can eat them, then changing the diet of what people are kind of eating. So instead of going to these dive shops or instead of going to these resorts and eating a big groper or a big shark, if they eat lionfish, then I mean, it is a small thing, but I think it's probably a positive step in the right
yeah,
direction.
yeah, for sure, for sure. And so yeah, so eating lionfish is good. And I mean, I think can you ever solve this problem with the lionfish? Well, it would be very hard. So invasive species have been eliminated, right? Again, Australia is a good example. So I think these rabbits have to a good degree been eliminated, right? And this was via two different viruses.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're not completely eliminated, but they've been reduced to the point where there's native species such as different wombats making some pretty good recoveries.
Yeah. So this what came together here, right? The original problem, releasing these rabbits, was removed, and then you had a very intelligent effort. The thing with the rabbits was they are eutherian mammals. They're very different from the marsupial mammals in Australia. So you know they're so different that you can have a virus which only kills these. I don't quite, they are very related fishes, of course, in the Caribbean. So I don't quite see how, you would be able to do that. But I think, what you want to do at this point is you want to just keep the problem in check as much as you can.
Mm. I guess it's like a lot of marine species.
Yeah. So essentially, it's probably unrealistic to say, well, in 5 years, we're going to have this area lionfish free. But you can probably reduce the damage they do on the native fauna if you keep hunting them, and if you want to establish marine protected areas, and that would you give the sharks and the big groupers a possibility to recover, and they would also keep the lionfish in check. So like it's a multi-pronged approach, and it's not easy, right? Because if you have a lot of people who depend on for their protein on fishing, you can't just say, well, you just have to like stop fishing now, and we're going to wait 20 years till the ecosystem recovers.
Yeah, and I think like that's a pretty standard thing. I know both in the north and the south of Australia on the coral reefs and the seaweed reefs, marine parks or that healthier ecosystem with that more biodiversity, as you mentioned earlier, is a defense. The
Ah, yeah.
healthier the system, the more it can resist these kind of impacts.
100%, 100%. And I think this is also shown in the case of the lionfish, and will also be the case for other problems, caused by humans. Crown of thorns. Our
Yeah.
book has a chapter on crown of thorns. Even coral bleaching. You will probably, we will have to get the global warming under control to actually stop that. But there is going to be quicker recovery and better recovery if there's a proper marine protected area versus an area where there's dredging and a lot of fishing and bad coastal development and things like that. So yeah, no, I 100% agree.
Well, just before we kind of get towards the end, do you have any cool facts about lionfish? Like we've talked about how bad they are, but if we look in the Pacific theater kind of area and ocean, they're kind of cool. So like, yeah, what would you say a cool fact is for lionfish lovers?
The thing is, when they come to the Philippines, they will see. So there are actually two invasive species in the Caribbean, which is the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific lionfish. So the Pterois volitans and miles, right? If you come to the Philippines, particularly when you do night dives for some reason, you will see a dozen extra species. So these are probably often only 6 or 7 centimeters long. They're very interesting small relatives of this lionfish, which are often really pretty. And when they feel threatened, what they often do is they spread their pectoral fins, and then they show, this. It's like a wasp, right? It's a coloration which is a warning, like stay away, I'm venomous. And these are often fantastic animals for underwater photographers. You can just take a shot of only that warning coloration on the fin, and it's very pretty.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, they hover, so they kind of just sit there in front of your camera. They're like a weedy sea dragon. They're the perfect photography specimen. Yeah.
Exactly. They don't get away. Yeah. So to all your viewers, please check out 25 Future Dives. Right. This is the name of the book. You can get it via Asian Geographic from their webpage. There is a paperback version, which I'm really very happy how the quality of the print, and there's an ebook version, and hopefully in the next few weeks we will have it on Amazon.
So we've talked about the cool facts and your cool new book coming out, which is awesome. And if anyone wants to, just as we wrap up, if anyone wants to see your photography or learn more about what you do in like addition to the book, where should they go and what should they do?
So I'm on several social media, most importantly YouTube, where there's a lot of my footage. And the handle is always Pacific Klaus. So Pacific like the ocean, and then Klaus like my last name, Klaus with a K. Pacific Klaus, and particularly YouTube, but also a lot of my photographs are on Flickr too, which I really appreciate as a platform, even though it has gone a little bit out of fashion. And there's my blog is also under pacificklaus.com. So there's a bunch of things, it ranges from me, spreading the word about serious marine biology to things like, my friend and I are performing underwater slapstick. and there's a little bit of that too on the YouTube.
Yeah, well, I'll post all those links, and I'm definitely a fan of all your work. But thanks very much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Seacreatures Podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by myself, Matt Testoni. You can see my photography on Instagram at Matt_Testoni_photography, or visit the Seacreatures Podcast Instagram, which is at Seacreatures_podcast. Production assistance by George McGrath, and music by the talented and amazing Dan Musil. If you like the show, please jump on to wherever you're listening to it and give us a review. It really helps. Also, the best way to help a podcast is to let other people know about the podcast. So if you've liked the show, please tell a friend. We also have Patreon, which is www.patreon.com/seacreaturespodcast, and that's where you can help with a small donation that goes towards the running costs of the show. Coming up next time on the Seacreatures Podcast, we're going to be talking all about the amazing world of seals with Professor Marianne Lee. This has been the Seacreatures Podcast. Over and out.